Hey Beakling, so today we're going to cover our very last curveball with this introductory genetics chapter. Now, for this one to make sense, of course you have to understand Mendel, all the simple Mendelian stuff with big T, little t, homozygote, heterozygote, all of that stuff. Probabilities, Punnett squares, should be no problem. Then we talked about some curveballs, all right? We talked about incomplete dominance, codominance, pleiotropy, right? Pleiotropy. Or we talked about epistasis, for example. We talked about multiple alleles, things like that. Not easy stuff, okay? Today is your last curveball. Today is your last one viewing something that Mendel would have just been mind blown. And a lot of people were mind blown by this until a certain scientist really went gung-ho on it. So to introduce this, I like to look at the royal family pedigree here. Excuse me. Hemophilia is an inherited disorder in which sufferers lack a necessary protein that allows their blood to clot. A classic example of how hemophilia is passed from generation to generation is found in the royal families of Europe in the 1800s and 1900s. This pedigree details the inheritance of hemophilia in the descendants of Queen Victoria of England. Study the pedigree and then answer the question, how is the inheritance of hemophilia different than that of most traits? So here we go. This is going to be brand new. Now there's going to be something here today that we have not talked about yet, and it's just yet another curveball trying to confuse us with genetics. All right, let's have a look. So here we can see, if I can scroll this down, a pedigree. All right, and you can see the key here. Okay, we have females are, of course, circles. Squares are males, right? And you can see there's a marriage line is the horizontal line, and the children are vertical. Okay, so here you can see some craziness going on right there. But what's happening is there's a disease called hemophilia running through this family. And if you look very carefully, you might be able to see a new pattern of inheritance or something crazy happening. Okay, pause the video if you want to, but try and give it a look and see what exactly is different here than anything we've looked at so far. Okay, take a second. So number one, what do all of the hemophilia sufferers have in common? So obviously if you have the disorder, you are completely shaded in. And I know this is an old copy that I use, so it's a little hard to tell. But I can tell you that every single person on this entire family tree, 4 generations of these royals, the only ones shaded in are males. Well, there's the first time we said that ever, right? Only males have this disease. Now, it doesn't have to be that way. You'll see why later. But only males have it. So there's the answer to number one. What about the next question that says, what do all the carriers have in common? All right, well, take a look at them. What do you notice about every single carrier or half-shaded person in this pedigree? They're all females. Okay, that's a little confusing. And now look at the last question. It says, the inheritance of hemophilia always follows the pattern shown in this pedigree. How is the inheritance different from the other traits we have studied? Well, basically, in the other traits we studied, sex doesn't really matter, right? So why is it that sex matters here? There's something really, really important going on here. Where is the gene located for hemophilia? Now let me tell you where my head was when I was in high school. I was confused and I thought, only guys get it. Hemophilia must be on the Y chromosome. And that's good thinking, right? But it's exactly wrong. Because guys get it more often, you can see on this pedigree here, that means it must be on the X chromosome, right? Because guys are hemizygous. We only get one copy of the X. Right? So whatever we get, we get. So if it's a recessive bad allele, we have the disease. Girls, you get 2. Right? You're homozygous for X's. So you get 2 chances to have a good X. And that's why girls generally only carry these diseases, whereas guys get them. So let's take a look at this. This is called sex-linked inheritance. Okay. And we'll take a look here. So I always like to talk to kids about genetics as far as Gregor Mendel. He is the reason that we really understand genetics, right? All of his work with pea plants and things like that, boy oh boy did he figure out the complex inheritance pattern. He set up the laws of inheritance, right? He figured out a whole lot of stuff. But then there's this Thomas Hunt Morgan guy, and that's why I have a picture of a fruit fly here, right? Because his work with fruit flies showed, oh my gosh, he took Mendel's work and he took it a step further, because he said, you know that Everything that Mendel did and these genes and everything, you know where they're all at? Chromosomes. Chromosomes are the key to inheritance patterns, right? And I know we're in Bio 1 right now, but if you keep going with biology, you're going to see these really cool problems you can do about gene linkage, okay, and crossover data and recombinants and all this really cool stuff. And it's all based on Thomas Hunt Morgan and his students doing these crosses with fruit flies. Okay, so we know a lot about genetics thanks to Drosophila melanogaster, the common fruit fly that we see with these big red eyes. So let's take a look today and figure out this last curveball to inheritance, sex-linked inheritance. We'll talk about a couple disorders as well. So, genes inherited on autosomal chromosomes pretty much obey Mendel's patterns. Remember what autosomes are? They're number 1 through 22 for humans, right? And then the 23rd pair is your sex chromosomes. And just like us, fruit flies have the same sex determination system, whereas a male fruit fly is XY and a female is XX. Okay, let's keep going. 1909, Thomas Hunt Morgan noticed one of his flies didn't have the typical deep red eyes, but had white eyes instead. Now, it doesn't take a rocket scientist to figure out what happened here. There's probably a mutation, right? So what we call the red then, the one that you always see everywhere, we call that the wild type, and you could pretty much guarantee that's dominant. Okay, but you should do some tests to double check that. But so now instead of the wild type that we always see, we have this white-eyed fly. So what's going on here? Well, Thomas Hunt Morgan was a geneticist. He got excited. He's like, oh, good, let me do some crosses and figure out what's going on here with the fly. So he basically assumed that red eyes must be dominant to white. That makes sense. And then he crossed a white male to a red-eyed female and got exactly what he suspected, all red-eyed flies. Just like Gregor Mendel, right? A 3-to-1 ratio. So far, there's nothing really crazy here. He said, oh, let me take a red-eyed fly and made it to a white-eyed fly, and I'll bet you in the F1, everybody's going to be red. Remember Mendel's F1? When he took purple and white, he got all purple. But then when he mated the F1 purple to purple, he got a 3-to-1 purple to white. Look at Thomas Hunt Morgan here. He got a 3-to-1 red to white. So far, Thomas Hunt Morgan is like, yeah, cool. I found a new gene. Nothing really spectacular going on here. Except, let's see here. He made an important discovery. All the white-eyed flies were male. That's a big deal. Okay? So, because all the white-eyed flies were male, that allowed him to realize two things. First of all, he was correct. The white eye was recessive. Okay, so red is dominant for sure. But then he also was smart enough to realize that the gene for eye color in a fly is on the X. Let's figure out how he figured this out. This is a little tricky. Okay, and this is X-linked inheritance. So we have a new type of Punnett square here now, right? When you're solving a sex-linked Punnett square, and I know we're moving fast, and you just got to keep trying to stick with me, but if I gave you a gene that you knew was on the X chromosome, you have to use X's and Y's now, right? In your Punnett squares, you have to actually do the boy and the girl and show the boy and the girl in a Punnett square. And if you notice, one huge mistake that I always see beaklings making, never put a gene on the Y. There is no gene on the Y. The Y chromosome makes you a guy and all that, but this gene that we're talking about is the eye color on the X. So if you notice here, what is this cross showing? It's showing a red-eyed female, which is homozygous, which basically almost every red fly would be, right? Unless you're doing some sort of study, because the wild type is basically everywhere. So we have X big R, X big R. That's the red female, right? Red-eyed female, red. And you're going to cross her to a white-eyed male, but look at the white-eyed male. He's X little r, Y. So he only has one X chromosome, and he happened to get the mutated white allele. So that's where he got his red and white. And take a look at the offspring now, the possible offspring inside of that Punnett square. You have all red. Now, what did it make the females, though? If you notice, the girls are now X big R, Y. Those are now carriers of the white. Okay? There's no way to get a white-eyed male, right? Because the girls gave the X and the dad gave the Y, so the girls gave their good X, their red X to the... So in this case, you could see the F1 is 100% red. Okay. All right. And now you can see over here, aha. Take a look what happens now. let's go ahead and take these F1 flies and mate them, right? Just like Gregor Mendel did. So basically, he thought he was setting up like a hybridization, a monohybrid cross, but he didn't realize it was sex-linked. And by the way, I'm using the word sex-linked because it's on a sex chromosome, not an autosome. We're only ever going to talk about X-linked diseases, so you don't have to worry about Y-linked diseases. Those are easy anyway because it's only guys. So if you notice here, XY is the guy, but he's red-eyed from the F1. Okay, remember up here. And then you're going to cross him to a red-eyed female, but she's a carrier. And because of that, look what you can get. A quarter of the offspring will actually be white-eyed males. Pretty neat, right? So, here you can see females will express the dominant allele on either of their X chromosomes, whereas males will express whatever is on their X chromosome. That's pretty much the key to recognizing X-linked inheritance. Girls, you'll express whatever is dominant. Guys, you express whatever you get. Okay, so you can see why this would be very rare for a girl to get an X-linked disease. She would need 2 bad copies of the X, right? Basically, her father would have to have the disease in that case, and her mom had to at least carry it. All right, now this is tricky your first time through it. Let's see here. So, how can we get a white-eyed female from these red-eyed females? All right, so here you can see we have heterozygous red-eyed females, and I want a white-eyed female. Okay, and sometimes in my AP Bio class, we set up these genetic crosses and do stuff like this. So how would I be able to get white-eyed females from those red-eyed females? Cross it to a what? A white-eyed male, right? Let's take a look. Aha. Right, so here's our red-eyed female, but she carries white. Here's our white-eyed male, and if he gives the X, making a daughter, and mom, of course, gives an X, but if she gives the bad X, you're going to get a white-eyed female. And notice half of these offspring would have white eyes. So that's very rare to have a girl with white eyes, but it can happen. Okay. All right, so sex-linked traits in humans and flies are different, but their inheritance is super similar, right? So they're almost always on the X, okay, because the most important genes are on the X. And I believe I told you this before, but that's why I don't, some people call the X chromosome the female chromosome, the Y the male chromosome. X is not the female chromosome. X is super important for everybody. Just so happens that, yeah, girls get 2 of them. Okay, but no, the Y chromosome, yeah, that gives maleness, okay? But the X chromosome is important for everybody. Okay, so almost all of these genes, like I said before, are going to be X-linked. And the small Y chromosome basically just makes you a guy. So the key to recognizing sex-linked inheritance is because males have just 1 copy, you express whatever gene you get. Okay, now again, I know this is pretty new to you, but if you look at the bottom here, because males pass their X along to their daughters, sex-linked genes tend to move from fathers to daughters, right? And then the sons of those daughters. So think about it. I'm a guy with an X-linked disease. If I pass a Y to my kid, thus making a boy, I didn't pass that on because I passed my Y. But if I pass an X, that means it's going to be a girl. And if I have that disease, boom, I just made a carrier. And now who does that girl generally give it to if the kid will be diseased? Well, that girl could then give it to her son because the guy gives a Y. And if she gave the bad X, boom, there it is. It'll show up in the son, right? So a little tricky to wrap your head around, but that's how you recognize, and that's what X-linked inheritance is all about. So there's a few diseases here that we could talk about. And again, a disease is anytime your body doesn't work the way it's supposed to, right? Like I have a disease because I'm wearing contacts, okay, contact lenses. So don't worry about this. A lot of guys actually have color blindness. It's about 9 to 10% of U.S. males are colorblind, and some kids don't even know until they take biology class in high school that they find out if they're colorblind. But I'm sure most of you have already gotten checked for things like this. So let's take a look here. The gene for normal color is on the X chromosome. And again, it's about 10% of U.S. males. So, pause the video if you have to. Who donates the recessive color blindness allele to the son? Think real hard about that. Right? If it's the color blindness allele, it has to be on the X. And who gives a son the X chromosome? The mother. right? Because dad had to give the Y chromosome. Okay, hopefully that's making sense to you. And what about this question? Red-green color blindness is about 10 times more common in males and females. Can you explain this? Again, pause the video if you want to think for a second. Why would red-green color blindness, which is one form, there's lots of different types of color blindness, why would this be more common in guys than girls? Oh, because how many copies do guys need? How many copies would, bad copies, right? How many bad copies would girls need? 2, right? So guys only need that 1 copy and we express whatever we get. So females need 2 recessive alleles, males only need 1. And before we go any further, don't forget what genetics is all about. Genes are found in your DNA, and as we're learning today, are found for us in chromosomes, right? And my DNA tells my RNA to tell my ribosome how to make a protein. That's gene expression, right? That's our next chapter. So what is it about color blindness? You have these cell types in your eyes, these rods and cones. And if you think about it, if we've already done photosynthesis, you know all about electromagnetic energy, right? Light exists as waves, and based on the frequency of the wavelength, you can see different colors of visible light. Well, your eyes are set up to accept these waves and tell your brain, sends a message back, what color you're seeing. Well, the problem is, if your proteins, because your DNA got messed up, which messed up your RNA, which told the ribosome to pull the wrong amino acids together, and you have misshaped cones, well, now you don't see colors exactly right. No big deal, right? Not a big deal at all. But point is, that's what color blindness is all about. It's all about proteins. So don't forget, genetic diseases, proteins. Whether you're talking about albinism, cystic fibrosis, phenylketonuria, Tay-Sachs disease, whatever, proteins. Okay? So let's keep moving. We'll give you all a color blindness test here. Here we go. Everybody should see the 25, no problem. All right, red-green colorblind see spots only, whereas the rest of us could probably see that 29 there, right? And can you see the 45, right? And hopefully everybody sees a 6. Can you see the 8 in the middle there? 5 or a 2? This one's a little tricky, right? Because the 5 is kind of here. I can see the 5, it's like a blue. And the 2 to me is actually right now very tricky for me to see, but I know that there it is. The 2 is kind of crooked. It's on an angle. Okay, so a lot of people do not see the 2. It's just a little different. And last one here, colorblind people would see this yellow circle. So hopefully you all see that, but then colorblind people can't see there's actually a brown square right here. Okay, and that's all just because of proteins in your eyes. No big deal. Okay, next genetic disorder. It's a little creepy, so if you don't like blood, you might want to go fast. Hemophilia, right? And now, whereas colorblindness is super common, I have kids in almost every single class. I've only had one colorblind female ever, but I have tons of boys over the years that are colorblind. Hemophilia, I've only actually had one student ever who was a hemophiliac. So what's going on here? Okay, so hemophiliacs can't produce one of the clotting factor proteins that help blood clot, so even small cuts can be dangerous, right? So you can see over here, you have these like cobweb-looking proteins, like fibrinogen, for example. This is a clotting factor. This helps stop your blood from bleeding out, right? And the problem with hemophiliacs is they don't make certain clotting factors, and thus their blood doesn't get stuck when they get injured, and that's a big problem. Okay? Now, again, it's X-linked recessive, and in this case, it's less than 1 in 10,000 males get it. They only need 1 copy. So this one, yeah, this is more detrimental. So if you're colorblind, meh, right? But if you're hemophiliac, no, this is important. You got to be very careful. And it's not usually the fact of like, yes, obviously, God forbid you're in a car accident or something like that. No, that's very dangerous for a hemophiliac, as it is for anybody. But it's more so, hey, you know, if you didn't know, hey, I played football, or I fell down the stairs or something, or I got in a car accident and got bruised up, but you might be bleeding internally and not even know it, right? So hemophilia is a very serious disease that you got to keep an eye on, okay? And they have injections that you can treat it with. So the clotting factors you can actually add, okay, things like that. But look at that, less than 1 in a million females are affected, and you all know why, because girls would need 2 copies of this disease. And this was the royal family that we talked about at the beginning today, right? Hemophilia in the royal family was rampant. And what is that? A good lesson? Don't mate with close relatives, right? So if you keep mating within the same bloodlines, any bad stuff that's in there is going to keep showing up. Okay, so those consanguineous matings, not a good idea. All right. And then finally, Duchenne Muscular Dystrophy. Okay, now this one's a little weird because there's all different variants of this, but I'm going to talk to you about a pretty severe variant of it right now. It's very sad disease. So dystrophin is a protein. These are all proteins, right? Whether you're talking about cone cells or whether you're talking about clotting factor proteins or whether you're talking about dystrophin. Your muscles are kind of like in bags, if you want to think of it that way. It's almost like somebody took saran wrap and wrapped it around meat. Okay, and it keeps all the meat tight, and muscles are actually like fibers. Okay, it's made out of these long myofibrils, and they come together forming these big fibers. So if you don't have them wrapped in this beautiful protein, in this like baggy, they kind of can fall apart, and you lose that muscle tone, and then you can't use them, and you absolutely need muscle to live. The skeletal muscle keeps you alive and does a lot of things for us besides just movement. So unfortunately, with this Duchenne Muscular Dystrophy, or DMD, U.S. males aged between 3 and 6, 1 in 3,000 is affected for this one very dangerous variant of it. So not a huge number. However, the X-linked recessive gene causes muscle cells to weaken suddenly, and the recessive allele produces defective proteins that cause muscle cells to weaken and break, resulting in death. Okay, so sadly, in this case, again, because my DNA had a mutation, was messed up, I don't make, and in this case, I'm a guy, so I only need one bad copy. Oh no, because I have a Y chromosome, but that doesn't do anything with dystrophin. So now that I have this X chromosome that's bad, I don't make the right protein. I die very, very young in life, right? Which is terrible. Whereas girls, you can carry it still. That's why it's not going away, right? Diploid. You can be a healthy carrier. Even if you do have one bad X, you still have a good X, so you're okay. But now you have to be careful because you could give it to your son, right? Or you can give it to your daughter as well, okay? But she'd probably be carrier, okay? But if you gave it to your son, that means that, oh, he's probably not going to last very long, right? And in this case, this variant of it, you don't see girls with this, right? Because the guys don't even live long enough to pass on their bad X, okay? So they don't have girls with this form of DMD, but there are other forms out there that girls can have. Okay, so there's another one. So those that's 3 sex-linked diseases that we talked about, plus fruit fly eyes. So if I gave you a question on a test or something, and I mentioned fruit fly eye color, if I mention color blindness, hemophilia, or DMD, you should all realize, oh, you're not tricking me, Mr. Boylan. You want us to put the X's and Y's on the Punnett square, right? Because now it matters if you're a boy or a girl. Okay. And one last little thing to talk about here. Well, actually, this is pretty cool. Okay, now this is old. I didn't look up new information on this for a while. But there is help for people. Now, this one didn't really take off that much. Okay, but if you think about it, and a lot of kids do think about this stuff, why don't we just make the proteins? So if people are dying of genetic diseases because they're missing proteins, for example, Tay-Sachs. Tay-Sachs is autosomal recessive, right? But a lot of these little kids die all because they're missing an enzyme to break down fat, and then the fat gets stuck in their brain and they die. Why not just give the kids the enzyme? It's not that simple. These enzymes are hard to make. They're hard to harvest, right? So we can't just do that. But in this case with muscular dystrophy, the scientists actually made utrophin. It was very similar to dystrophin, and it showed promise, but doesn't help in the long run. Okay, and again, this is old. There's gene therapy going on now like crazy and everything. This is old school protein injection, but it's pretty neat how you can follow the way scientists have been trying to fix a lot of these diseases. Okay, so last thing here. Oh, showed up a little weird. Girls, of course, have to do something crazy here just to make it even more complex on us. Now, you got 2 X chromosomes, whereas we only get 1 as guys. Okay? But guess what these girls can do, which is awesome? They can take one of their 2 X's, because is that fair? Is it fair that girls get 2 of these beautiful, lovely X chromosomes and guys only get 1? No. So what do guys do? Or I'm sorry, what do girls do? They take one of their X's and they turn it off. They crunch it up and shut it down. How weird is that? They inactivate one of their X chromosomes. Okay, and we know this happens in human and all mammal females. So what's going on here? And this happens during embryonic development. So when you're only a couple 100,000 probably cells or a couple million cells, you decided what X you're going to turn off and you stick to that X, which is crazy. So for the rest of your life, whatever X got turned off in that specific cell, every cell that came from that cell will have the same X turned off. And it's completely random. All right, so what we call that is a bar body. When a girl turns off an X, it's a bar body. Now don't confuse that with the polar bodies. Remember, polar bodies are when girls were making their eggs. They kept stealing the cytoplasm to one of them. So instead of making 4 haploid gametes, they made one real good egg with all that cytoplasm. And then the 3 other waste cells we called polar bodies. This is a bar body. Okay, so this is when a girl turns off an X. And it's interesting because think about it. If a girl is a carrier, okay, and let's say she's, for color blindness, let's say, big C, little c, if she turned off the X that had the good gene on it, all the cells that are made with this X being active are going to have misshaped cones. Okay, she won't be able to see colors as well, but that's okay because guaranteed in other cells, she would have turned off the bad X and kept the good one on so she could see colors fine overall. Okay, but if you looked at the actual proteins, okay, it would almost be a, what a codominant kind of look, right? Because some are good and some are bad. Okay, it's kind of weird how this X inactivation works. So just realize that that changes things too. Okay, and you might say to yourself, what are the odds? What if she turned off every single good X? I mean, the odds of that are astronomically low, right? That's basically impossible. But yeah, if she turned off every single good X, she would have the disease then. Okay, but it's usually a mix back and forth. And it only matters if she's, heterozygous. You call that mosaicism, okay, or a mosaic pattern. And that's really cool. You can see it here in calico cats. Okay, I don't know if this is exactly calico or if that's tortoiseshell, but point is, just think about this. If a cat is walking down the street, right, a certain species of cat, or a certain type, breed, if you see in that cat that it's orange and black, you can pretty much make a bet with one of your buddies and say, hey, I'll bet you $5 I know the sex of that cat. Without even walking over and lifting up its tail and looking, you could probably know the sex of an orange and black cat because you're smart enough to know that the gene for coat coloring for orange and black is on the X chromosome, right? Or a calico cat, for example, has to be a girl. Here's why. The X chromosome carries the gene for orange or black. So if you're a guy, what could you have? Only orange with a Y or only black with a Y, right? So a guy cat theoretically can only be black or orange. You're not going to have that black and orange. But if you're a girl, okay, you're orange and black. But wouldn't that be like orange black at the same time in every cell? Nope, because remember what girls do in mammals? If she turns off the black, that cell's going to make orange. And if she turns off the orange and activates that into a bar body, that cell's going to make black. So female cats, really cool. They can be walking around with these different coat colors, and you know it's because, oh, wow, when she was in embryo, right, she turned off certain chromosomes in there. Pretty neat stuff, right? And I have an article about that you guys can read. So very cool. So anyway, that is your last curveball for genetics, sex-linked inheritance. Okay, and it all started with this guy named Thomas Hunt Morgan playing with fruit flies, and he realized that, wow, this one mutation that I see here, it only shows up in the white variant, only showed up in males. And he started thinking, he's like, oh my gosh, fruit flies are just like us with these chromosomes, X are females, XY, boom, there it is. And now you know in sex-linked inheritance, most genes are X-linked that we talk about, right, because they're on the X chromosome. And now you can see a whole other inheritance pattern. That's pretty tricky to figure out. Okay, so it doesn't stick very easily right away for some kids, but just keep going through it, and that'll eventually be easy for you to learn about. Okay, good luck, and I hope you guys found this helpful. Take care.